In this video, I will be showing you how to find the roots of f of x. So we're first going to start by finding all the factors for the last term, which is 40 here. So it's going to be plus or minus 40, and then it could be with plus or minus 1, and then it'll also be plus or minus 2, and then plus or minus 20, and then we'll move on. It'll be plus or minus 4, plus or minus 10, and finally we'll have plus or minus 5 and plus or minus 8. So those are all the factors of 40. So then now what we'll do is we'll put that all over the factors of the leading coefficient of x to the fifth, which is 1. So it's just going to simply be plus or minus 1. So now we're going to use this fraction to find all the possible roots of this. So we're going to do plus or minus 40 divided by plus or minus 1, which is going to be just plus or minus 40. Then we'll get, just go through, it'll be plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 20, plus or minus 4, plus or minus 10, plus or minus 5, and plus or minus 8. So those are all the possible factors. So now we'll go through and we're going to plug in these factors into this equation to see which of them comes out to 0. So when we do so, we're going to see that plus 1 doesn't come out to 0. It'll have a remainder, same with negative 1. But when we plug in 2, we'll see that it comes out to 0. So when we do f of 2 is going to be equal to 2 to the fifth minus 8 times 2 to the fourth, then plus 29 times 2 squared minus, or 2 to the third, this should be a third, sorry, and that should be squared, minus 62 times 2 squared plus 76 times 2, and finally minus 40. So when we do the math, 2 to the fifth is equal to 32. Then negative 8 times 2 to the fourth will be negative 128. Then 29 times 2 to the third will be plus 232. Negative 62 times 2 squared will be negative 248. Then 76 times 2 will be plus 152. And then everything and all said and done will be minus 40. So then, once you add up all these numbers, you will get 0. So now that we see that 2 is indeed a factor of f of x, we would now take this and start our synthetic division to start to simplify this larger equation. So we do this by setting up our synthetic division line, and we'd have our 2, and then we take the leading term of each x and 40. So we take 1, then negative 8, 29, negative 62, 76, and finally negative 40. And then we'd start our synthetic division. So we drop the 1 first off, so we'd get 1. Then we'd multiply 2 times 1, so we'd get 2. Then we'd add these two numbers together, so it'd be negative 6. Then negative 6 times 2 is negative 12. Then 29 plus negative 12 is going to be equal to 17. Then 17 times negative 2 will be, or times 2 will be 34. Then negative 62 plus 34 will equal negative 28. And then negative 28 times 2 will be negative 56. Plus 76 will be 20, and then finally 20 times 2 is going to be 40, and then that'll equal 0, which is what we expected to have a remainder of 0 because f of 2 is a factor. So then we'll go on, and this will be the result of this will be our new equation. As we saw, the highest power was to the fifth in the original equation, so now it's going to be to the fourth because we simplified it. So this is going to be f of x. Our new f of x is going to be x to the fourth, and we're going to be using these as the leading coefficients. So then it's going to be negative 6x to the third, then plus 17x squared, minus 28x, and then this is just going to be 20. So we're going to repeat the same process by plugging these possible factors in, starting again with plus or minus 1 into this equation, and we'll see again that 2 is a factor. And we'll see this by when we plug it in, so f of 2 is going to be equal to 2 to the fourth minus 6 times 2 to the third plus 12 times 2 squared minus 28 times 2, and then finally plus 20. So when we do the math, it'll be 16, then minus 48, plus 68, minus 56, and then finally plus 20. So when we add all these numbers up, that'll come out to 0. So now that we see that f of 2 is a factor of this new f of x, we'd again just do our synthetic division. So we take the leading coefficient term. So it'd be 1, negative 6, 17, 28, and 20. So we just do our synthetic division again. So that's drop to 1. Then 1 times 2 is 2. Then add those together. It'd be negative 6 plus 2 is negative 4. And I think you get the point. You just multiply these two numbers and add. So then we'd just be working our way through here. And that should actually be a negative 28, sorry. And we just keep going, and we'd finally get to the end here where it comes out to 0. So then, this is just really repetitive, we just keep going. So then, since this was to the fourth, this new equation is going to be to the third. So our new equation is going to be f of x, x to the third, then minus 4x to the x squared, then plus 9x, and then finally minus 10. So then we'd just do the same thing. Plug in a number, and we'd see that 1 doesn't work, negative 1 doesn't work, and we'd see again 2 works. So we'd go f of 2 is going to be equal to 2 times 3, 2 to the third minus 4 times 2 squared, then plus 9 times 2, then finally minus 10. So we'd see this comes out to 8. This comes out to negative 16. This comes out to 18, and then finally this is 10. So once we add all those up, it equals 0. So then we would do our synthetic division again to simplify it even further. So 2, then 1, negative 4, that's a 4, sorry, negative 4, 9, and negative 10. Draw the line, drop the 1, 1 times 2 is 2. Add those together, negative 2. Negative 2 would be negative 4. Add those together, 5. Then finally 5, 10 is equal to 0. So then this is our final equation that we need after it's simplified. And from here we could just get the last 2 roots. So as we see, this does not factor nicely, so we have to do quadratic formula. Negative b is going to be 2, then plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 4, then minus 4 times a, which is 1, and then times c, which is 5, all over 2a, which is 1, so it's 2 times 1 is equal to x. Once we get here, we'd continue on and just see that this would still be 2 plus or minus square root of, once we do this, it'd be 4 minus 20, because this equals minus 20. So then it'd be negative 16 over 2 is going to be equal to x. We continue to simplify that. Since this is a negative, we're going to draw out the radical negative 1. So we're going to split this off into negative 1 and radical 16. Radical negative 1 and radical 16 over 2. And then the square root of negative 1 we know is I. So that's going to be 2 plus or minus I. And then the square root of 16 is 4. And then that's all going to be over 2. And then we're going to put this into a plus bi form and simplify it. So that's going to simply cancel, and that's going to be 1 plus or minus. And then 2 or 4 divided by 2 is going to be 2i. So those are our last two roots. So finally we could write it out. The roots are going to be 2, and we saw that it was a root 3 times. So we're going to see 2 with a multiplicity of 2, or 3 I mean. And then we have 1 plus or minus 2i for a total of 5 roots. So that is how you find the roots of f of x.